Hello, everyone out there attending AVENGERCON. This is Weapons of Mass Destruction, a look at the ransomware pandemic. I'm Fernando Tomlinson. A little bit about myself. I've been with the Department of Defense for about 19 years. I'm in the Army, Chief Warrant Officer. I currently do forensics and malware analysis. I'm an adjunct cybersecurity professor where I teach digital forensics and Python. Also do consulting with Reliable Cyber Solutions, a company focused on cyber training. I'm a PowerShell enthusiast, as articulated here. There's a couple places in which I have a presence on the interwebs, and you see that there as well. All right, here's our quick agenda for what we're going to actually go through for today. All right, so as we get into talking about the ransomware aspect of it, we would be remiss if we didn't talk about just malware types at large, right? So we see viruses and we understand that they work by copying themselves. We see worms and we understand that they need to replicate to other machines that could be effective, and they do that on their own. We see Trojans that misrepresent themselves, and on down a little bit more, we see ransomware. All right, and very quickly we see that those items are designed to deny access to a system or a piece of data until a ransom is paid. But while that's a definition, what do other people, cybersecurity professionals or organizations in our field, what do they say about it? Well, largely speaking, while the definitions are slightly different, they're all largely saying the same thing, right? And at the end of the day, ransomware just solely prevents somebody from accessing their data. So it's reassuring to see that the various cybersecurity entities are largely saying the same thing. Well, thinking about ransomware, who are the targets, right? From a home user perspective, these are people who typically don't have backups. They have little to no cybersecurity education. They don't really understand safety aspects that should be practiced on the internet. They probably don't keep their software up to date, and they largely haven't invested in cybersecurity solutions. So that's what makes home users a great target. From a business aspect, well, we all realize that's where the money is at. Attackers know that if they can cause some form of disruption to the business, then the business would have a large adverse action taken against them. We also understand that vulnerabilities are prone based upon the complexities in an organization. And at the end of the day, cyber criminals realize that businesses would rather deal with this type of attack in-house rather than have to face all kinds of legal fees or legality stuff, and even their reputation being tarnished of sorts. So cyber criminals realize that, and they target home users and businesses for the reason. So, why is it really a thing? Well, because at the core, these cyber criminals are able to instill fear in their victims, right? Maybe it's one of those things where they feel like they could blackmail a person. We look at that from the perspective of cyber extortion, all trying to hold something over an entity, whether it's a person or an actual company, but holding them and their data at risk, right? So that way they feel like they have to pay this ransom to be able to get it back. And really the impact, temporary permanent loss, proprietary information, right? Nobody wants to lose something that they've been working on for so long, or some type of proprietary information that they don't have any backups for. Financial loss, especially if it's some type of e-commerce organization in which they need to sell goods. And if they can no longer sell those goods because their infrastructure is not available, well, that's going to have significant impact of sorts. And then, we can harm, or they could harm, the organization's reputation. Largely, as one continues to provide a form of goods, the reputation grows. And when they can no longer do that, it begins to tarnish. And that becomes part of the impact of this whole thing. So some of the vectors, they don't just wake up one day and get hit with ransomware. Right? Some of the most common vectors, spear phishing. Why? Because the human factor is always going to be a concern for us. Vulnerability exploitation, publicly facing vulnerability exploitation of sorts, meaning that I could be at my home somewhere or on my cell phone and access public facing assets that contain a vulnerability And if I have the ability to exploit or gain access to that target and then swim downstream, well, then I position myself in which I could leverage some payload to encrypt their file system. Poorly secured services. Generally speaking, no admin goes out and configures systems to be poorly secured, right? They all have the best intentions. Maybe if they disable this option that allows them to access this machine in a quicker fashion, it just really varies of sorts. But again, at the end of the day, there's some type of vector that allows an actor to gain access to that target. And once they're in there, they can then inflict their pain. So as we look at the types of ransomware, it really buckets down into two. We have lockers, and lockers essentially deny access to the system itself. It affects the interface, but doesn't affect the underlying files. With that, they're more easily removed. So think of it from the perspective of there's a pop-up that presents itself, and you're just trying to get rid of the pop-up, because once you do that, you're able to then access the system files that you have. Nothing on the system is affected. You're just presented with the roadblock, if you will, preventing you to get to it. And then we have crypto, and this is what we commonly see nowadays, right? These things prevent access to the files and the data. They encrypt the system and aspects of the systems, and they require some type of key to reverse that process, making it to where the user could get their files back in the form in which they previously were. All right, so as we talked about that very quickly, we'll take a trip back down memory lane. And what I mean by that is we're going to take an opportunity to really highlight the history of this thing and really how do we get to where we're at now. So the first form of ransomware was the AIDS ransomware, developed in 1989 by Dr. Joseph Pop, excuse me. And at the time distributed over 20,000 copies, was done on a floppy disk. Right. So now, some of us remember floppy disk days, some don't. It's all right. Right. And this thing was labeled with AIDS information introductory diskettes. And this was at a time where AIDS research was kind of becoming much more prevalent. And what happened was on this disk, there was a survey. And after the 90th reboot, the ransomware would then kick in. It would replace the autoexec.bat. And the autoexec.bat, of course, points to different binaries on the disk telling them what order and what to actually execute. So it would then hide the directories, rename files on the C drive, and the ransom note or the ransom period was really like a license fee. And the license fee was $189 or $378, such odd numbers. I recognize that. And think about the time, right? We didn't have electronic means, if you will. So they wanted this sent to a PO box in Panama, cashier's check, international money order. Now, this didn't last long. Dr. Joseph Pop was arrested, charged with blackmail in the United Kingdom. He was extradited to the United States, but he claimed that the money would be donated to AIDS research, which we find that hard to believe. But this was the first instance that we are then introduced or hit with ransomware, right? Some other things happened, but I'll fast forward to like 2008. And this is when cryptocurrency first came to light. This is a big thing when you think about the history of ransomware. Why? Because with that, we had stuff like Bitcoin, anonymous, secure, instant, not regulated. Holy crap. That makes it perfect for extortion. You know that, I know that, cyber criminals recognize that, right? So then we fast forward to 2012. And this form of ransomware exploits vulnerabilities in the browser. It redirects people from adult sites, right? So you would have to be looking at adult content, and then you would get redirected if it was your unlucky day. The payments were in the sum of $300. They wanted them paid via prepaid money cards. And the tactics, right? Because once you get redirected, they would try to impersonate law enforcement. So we see an example of that screen, excuse me, off to the right, where it's trying to impersonate the FBI cybercrime division, right? And if you're not keen to this, you may look at it and be like, holy crap, this is really real, right? So this is gonna lock a user out their system. And later versions of this ransomware actually had password stealers, and it would steal passwords even after you paid. Talk about a double whammy. Nonetheless, this was easily removable if you knew what you were doing, right? You boot to safe mode, you remove the registry entry that then popped this up, and all was well. So here's another example of the screen that may be presented to a person, and check it out. NSA Internet Surveillance Program. So if you were not keen to this, you may feel like this is real, right? They got some regulatory stuff up there that makes it seem very legit. And again, they're just trying to inflict fear. And if they can do that successfully, you're going to pay. All right. So then 2013 came around, and then we had Crypto Locker, right? This was generally delivered via an email vector. It sought to encrypt your files, something to the sum of 70 common file types. First one to use asymmetric encryption, so we had a private and public key. Utilize DGA, so domain generating algorithms. So in this ransomware, it had a subset of domains, and at certain times, the domains would then get DNS entries. So as the ransomware went down the line, it would then have a place or a point in which it would point to specific domains as they became activated. At the time, over 250,000 machines were affected. This thing propagated over the Game Over Zeus botnet. Now, luckily for us, or everybody, it was taken down in 2014 by DOJ. The keys were recovered from the C2 server, given out to people who were infected from it. So there was a happy end, if you will, to this. 2014, not much better. We had Torrent Locker, right? Mainly seen in Australia, New Zealand, spread primarily through email. Go figure. It encrypted files as well. It harvested emails so that way it could propagate itself to people that you had previously communicated with. It deleted volume shadow copies. Why is that? Because again, you know, in some cases that's where people that's what people utilize for their backups. It was quick and easy from a Windows perspective. The ransom at the time, $500 of Bitcoin, had to be paid over 3 days, and each victim received something different as far as a note and how long they had to actually pay. So it varied per victim. 2015, Tesla Crypt. What did it use for a vector? You guessed it, email. It also utilized vulnerable servers that could be exploited. Had about 185 extension file types that it targeted. And then it also targeted gaming data, right? So now, not only are we getting a person's actual system, but people who utilize their systems for gaming, we're also going to target them as well, some to the sum of 40 file extension types, $550 of Bitcoins, right? And then that fee increased after a week. And off to the right, we see that message that the user would get. But when we look at just encrypting common file types and now getting gaming data, we're getting a different set of people. We're expanding the reach when it comes to ransomware. So that was something that was interesting and new at that time. All right, 2016 though, this server was, the actors who managing this server, they stopped propagating the malware. It is believed that they switched to other variants. And then guess what? They released a master key of sorts. So that way people who were infected could then get their data back, right? And you see that note that they populated on their site there within Tor, telling people about it. 2016, though, that same year, we had Locky. This is when we started to get into malicious Office products, right? Informed users to enable macros if they can't read the data. And the data is an example off to the right. So if you look at this, this is just a bunch of characters, right? Trying to make it look like it's encrypted or encoded, if you will. And then they get this text, this string, telling people if they can't read it, go ahead and enable macros. Well, doesn't matter if they enable macros or not, they're still not going to be able to read it because it's just text, just a string within that Word document. But nonetheless, subset of people click to enable macros. It then began to spread, that web document, that document itself was spread through an email, right? Distributed through botnet, over 5 million machines. Now, what's interesting is that it didn't affect systems with the Russian language pack. Why do you think that is, right? So if I'm in the US and I don't want to infect other people in the US, I may look to exclude the English language pack if I was trying to do that. Nonetheless, the ransoms, 5,000 or 10,000, that's locky, right? But again, taking advantage of lack of understanding for IT, how products work, and it was getting a number of people. So really when we look at the timeline, the attacker sends an email, the user opens the email with the attachment being that Word document. The user enables that macro, right, to help render the data. A binary is downloaded, executed, backups are deleted, and files encrypted. And we already know why the backups are deleted, right? Because once a user realizes that their file system has been encrypted, that's the first thing they're going to go look to. So that way they can restore their system without having to pay any type of ransom. But we also see the note that was left for the user as well, telling them that their system was actually encrypted. 2016, we had Petya, rewrites the master boot record, forces a blue screen of death, right? And when it does that, it then check this, a fake one runs, and it encrypts the master file table, right? And because it does that, we essentially block access to the whole machine, not just the files. The ransom here was in the sum of $300. Looking at the chart in the bottom right, we see by country which one was infected the most, right? So we see Ukraine significantly infected much more than other countries of sorts. All right, we also had WannaCry, first seen in 2017, affected over 300,000 systems in 150 countries. It propagated via SMB exploit, right? So this was SMB v1. We're not going to talk to the actual exploit itself. However, it cost over $1 billion in damages, and it primarily targeted Windows 7 machines. The ransom was in the sum of $300 or $600. It went from 300 within the first 6 hours to 600 over 3 days. It threatened to delete if there was no payment within a week, so they were not playing around with this. Luckily, it was a kill switch domain in the code, so a malware researcher was able to find that domain, went out and registered it, and then was able to essentially help stop the propagation of this malware. It was dubbed the biggest outbreak in history, and it could have been a lot larger if it wasn't for that malware researcher. So how did this thing really propagate, and what was this timeline? Well, it arrived via exploit. The exploit was 17-010, and then it delivered itself via a service. It dropped the ransomware in the form of a binary, and it performed some form of encryption. That encryption went after certain extensions, and it also dropped the ransom note based on a config file that was set there for the binaries. Those files that were encrypted were something to the sum of 176 extensions and file types. WannaCry was not playing around. 2019, we had Maze ransomware, spam emails, exploit kits, post-compromise. It was capable of encrypting the host system through a virtual machine. So Maze, in some aspect, would get on a target, install a virtual machine on that target, and from that virtual machine back to the host, it would encrypt the host itself. It nearly targeted every industry sector. We see a subset of countries that were targeted the most. These actors had no shame. What they would actually do was they would have a public-facing website, and they would post stolen data from their victims who refused to pay. So they put you in such a position in which they forced you to pay, and where you decided you were not going to pay, then they were just going to post your data online. Right? That's pretty ruthless of sorts. But when we're dealing with cyber criminals, there is no shame in their game. They will definitely do what they need to make the money they seek to make. First seen in 2018 was Ryuk, and that still haunts us today, right? It is assessed that that code is based on the Hermes ransomware. It targets organizations with critical assets, something to the sum of 100K to 500K for ransom, delivered through phishing, Emotech, TrickBot, right? All of those things, for the most part, Emotech and TrickBot, loaders that enable the delivery of the Ryuk payload. We see one example of the ransom note that is delivered, but again, Ryuk still hunts us today, and very sophisticated of sorts. So their delivery campaign, if you will, as an example, phishing email, they might have a weaponized Word document containing a macro. When it launches, kicks off PowerShell, that then kicks off something on a command line, if you will. PowerShell downloads Emotech. That Emotech loader grabs and deploys TrickBot. TrickBot looks to harvest data, steal some credentials, disable AV, essentially creating a path for Ryuk to actually be downloaded as a payload to execute. So we can see this as a multi-stage thing, all enabled by other variations of ransomware. So now that we've kind of gone back down memory lane as far as where we started, some ransomware types leading us up to present day, I'll take a pause here, right? Because the title of this talk talks about a pandemic, right? And per Webster, pandemic, right? Adjective of a disease prevalent throughout an entire country, continent, or whole world. All right, I just want to harp on that a little bit because when we look at ransomware, kind of like the coronavirus, it didn't or does not affect one aspect of the world. It is literally affecting all of us, the coronavirus, much like ransomware is affecting all of us right now. All right, so that's where we drill in the similarities. Now, let's get to the point where we start talking about numbers. 2015, the FBI had 8,000 complaints with a reported loss of 275 million. We get to 2018, 351,000 complaints with 2.7 billion. 2019, and we just see it continuously grow. It's only going to get worse as it is done since the early days, right? Just looking at 2015 to 2019, it's just continuing to get worse. Some other statistics from 2019, 50% of surveyed 582 cyber professionals don't even believe their organizations are prepared to be able to deal with the ransomware attack. Interesting. 34% of businesses hit with ransomware, it took 7 days or more to regain access. What does that do for their overall bottom dollar, for their business, for their reputation, for their stocks, for everything, right? When we look at phishing emails, they were increased by 109% from 2017. This becomes, it has continued to be one of the #1 vectors of sorts. 99% of ransoms were paid in Bitcoin. No secret there, right? Unregulated, awesome for extortion of sorts. So it becomes the currency of choice for cyber criminals. Some more staggering statistics. The average incident lasts 9.6 days. The decryptor, right? This is the thing that, in theory, allows you to decrypt your data, bringing it back to what it was to begin with before ransom hit you. The decryptor, when supplied, the decryptor is supplied 96% of the time after the payment. So that's good. Now, here's another one. The data successfully recovered 93% of the time with the decryptor. Okay, so you find yourself with your data encrypted, you paid the ransom, and then 93% of the time, the decryptor that's supplied actually works. I would hate to be part of the 7% in which I paid the ransom and got the decryptor and it didn't work. That's a double whammy if I've ever seen one. All right, less than 25% of people or entities, organizations even report their ransomware attacks. Why? They're embarrassed. They don't want, their business to be affected, and a number of other things. Okay, so let's look at some United States industries that were affected. 966 organizations. We're going to use that number. 11.7 of them were state municipal governments. 79% were healthcare. 9.3 was education. We see where healthcare comes into play because now we're talking about life and death in some aspects. So what's the true effect of it? Emergency room patients had to be redirected. 911 services were interrupted. Surveillance systems went offline. Jail doors could not be remotely opened. Schools could not access data about students' medications or allergies. Wow, that is ruthless, right? Breaking it down some more, some state governments. City of Atlanta, we're all familiar with this. The ransom was $52,000. They did not pay. In the end, they ended up paying $17 million as far as what it costs for recovery and the cost of loss of business, right? Jackson County, Georgia, ransom $400,000. They paid it. The effect on it, law enforcement databases and controls were encrypted. They paid it, they got that access back. City of Baltimore in May 2019, $75,000 ransom, didn't pay it, right? The recovery cost more than 18 million. Riviera Beach, Florida, 600,000, they paid it. The attack shut down the city's website, email servers, billing systems. In the end, the city ended up also investing $900,000 into new hardware to rebuild their IT infrastructure. So all in all, 600,000 for the ransom, $900,000 for the investment. Whoa, that was a big hit, especially on a smaller city like that. Lake City, Florida, $460,000. They paid it. It hit their email server and their 911 dispatches. New Bedford, Massachusetts, 5.3 million. They did not pay it. They attempted to negotiate, right? They wanted to get it down to 400,000. The actor was like, no, thank you. In the end, 158 workstations were encrypted, roughly 4% of the city's computers. Hall County, Georgia, fairly recent. Don't know what the ransom amount was. It disabled databases with voter registration information. So this starts to speak to ransomware affecting large scale stuff, right? Especially as we just went through, or as we continue to go through the counting of ballots for, or at the time of this recording, the counting of ballots for the elections of sorts. So some other victims. Wood Ranch Medical, California, unknown ransom, 5,800 records inaccessible. The organization's backup server was encrypted as well. This organization ended up going out of business. Wow. Heritage Group, unknown ransom. After 60 years of business, they ended up going out of business as well. 300 employees were left without a job just before Christmas. I'm sorry, they didn't go out of business. They just paid the unknown ransom amount, but it hit at such a time just before Christmas where they had to lay people off during that time frame. Hospital in Germany, fairly recent, unknown ransom, affected 30 servers, crashed systems. They were forced to turn patients away to go to other hospitals. In doing so, one patient actually died as they were trying to go from this hospital to another hospital, right? Wow, that is crazy, right? And we continue to see more and more of this, right? Rockville School District, 176,000. They negotiated down to 88,000. They were then able to get some of that stuff covered through their cyber ransom insurance, if you will. Now, on one side, you might be thinking, wow, that is really, really rough, right? On another side, you may be like, man, I really wish I had some skills like that, all right? So you can hold people at ransom. Wrong, right, and different. Well, if you don't have the skills, it's okay. Not saying that you should do it, but for those who don't have the skills, but that's their calling, there's ransomware for the less skilled, right? So there's some open source stuff. There's also some ransomware as a service, so you could outsource it and get that being done for you. One of them is Satan. You can customize your ransomware. Pick the ransomware amount, the Bitcoin address, the authors in the end, they're going to get a 30% profit from everything that you make, right? So we're able to blow this up, and you can see that it's a GUI-like thing that you can customize it to be whatever you want it to be. Making ransomware easy for the people that are less skilled. Now, looking at it from this perspective, you might be thinking, hey, I can't get hit with ransomware if I don't use Microsoft Windows. Well, that's not accurate, right? Because when I look at it, you can actually utilize ransomware against a number of systems, right? So we see this right here where there's ransomware for Linux, Mac OS, iOS, Android, right? So we look at Linux as an example. We have Linux encoder. Those target web servers, Bitcoins, in the sense of that's what they're paying, 1 Bitcoin per file that is encrypted. We have Mac OS, right? Mask as a patch for popular apps is what the ransomware patcher did. It was a fee of $300 in which they charged. Now, we also have the iOS ransomware, and essentially what it did was it locked the phone via compromised iCloud credentials, charged people $100 to get that back, right? But we see there's all kinds of ransomware for things other than just Windows. Well, if you think that was fun, and you're like, okay, well, what's next, right? There's something else. the future of ransomware. We think about Internet of Things. What happens now that we have refrigerators that are plugged up and webcams and vacuum cleaners and phones and keys and thermostats and everything else, right? These just present another attack surface for people to gain access and take advantage of, particularly when we start thinking about hospitals, right? Pacemakers, insulin pumps, a number of other things, right? It's it's weird, right? In the sense that the future of this stuff is really scary. Well, I want to tell you the future is really now. Pen testers at DEF CON successfully compromised a connected thermostat. They locked the device until the ransom was paid. Now, this was just a thermostat at the event, right? But they had the ability to change the temperature of sorts. And we see a picture of that thermostat in the bottom right hand corner there. Now, if that's not enough, an LG TV was hit with Android ransomware. This TV had the Android software on it of sorts. So this ransomware pretended to come from the FBI. The ransomware charge was roughly $500. And if you didn't want to pay that, you could try to reach out to LG. LG charged $340 just to help, right? Because if you just wanted to reset the TV back to its factory defaults, LG eventually provided the reset steps for free because they didn't want to lose customers of sorts. But we see that we're starting to get the ransomware of the future. We're starting to have to deal with that now, right? And even further, a pen tester for AVAS was successfully able to access a coffee maker within 6 days, right? He could trigger the coffee maker to turn on the burner, dispense water, spin the bean grinder, beep repeatedly. He could also display a ransom message. These actions would continue until the device was unplugged, right? So as we zoom in, you see he's got want your machine back, and then he's got a bit.ly link there that somebody can navigate out to pay whatever that ransom is. Again, the ransomware of the future is really now. Let's look at where we're going to be in 2025 at this rate, right? Business and manufacturing, 40% of the stuff that they're going to be using is going to be some type of IoT device. Healthcare, 30%, right? Everybody's just going to continue to use the IoT aspect, and ransomware is going to continuously seek to transition over to those devices, right? Now, you might be feeling like, wow, that's crazy, right? You'll be okay or whatever, right? You're trying to present one type of look while in the inside you have a different look, but nonetheless, all will be well, right? You're probably going to go through the 5 stages of ransomware grief if you are hit with ransomware. Very short, right? Denial. You're like, hey, how did, are you serious? Did this happen? And then you start trying to figure out what to do next. You're immediately followed with anger, right? You're telling me somebody got themselves into our system and including the backup. You're starting to get mad at the fact that this happened. Then you start bargaining, right? Oh, please, God, help us get our data back. Can the FBI help us? Then you transition to depression. Oh, this is probably the end of my career. Our share price is down 30%. And lastly, you find yourself just accepting it, right? Get the Bitcoin and pay those people, right? 5 stages of ransomware grief. Now, here's mitigation techniques. We call it the playbook. Some of it's going to sound cliche, but it's the simple things that will help you not be a victim, right? Take regular backups of important files, test those backups, and for the love of everything, store the backups off-site. You don't want to store the backups on the same network in which somebody could deliver a ransomware payload and encrypt. Don't click on links or downloads, attachments, and unknown, unexpected emails. We already know this, but people still do it. So what do we need to do? If you're an admin, you need to block and limit those attachments. You need to have some type of filter, and you need to educate your users and do it regularly. Make sure your cybersecurity software is up to date. Employ some type of application control. Employ least privilege, right? Removing the ability for some of these things to execute. Make sure that you use unique, strong logon passwords. Change them frequently. Do not allow for password reuse. Again, keep your software up to date. Validate hashes and make sure you're getting this stuff from a trusted resource. Some other mitigations and techniques. Sites like KnowBe4. KnowBe4 has a ransomware simulator that you can download. And if you feel like your system is configured in such a way where you're not going to be affected by ransomware, you can run this simulator and it will present to you files, a list of files that would be encrypted if particular malware, particular ransomware were to execute. There's 16 different scenarios of sorts, and we see a visual of that in the bottom right-hand corner, right? So we see the number of files, we see the file types of sorts, and then again, we have a number of scenarios in which we could run. So know before, it's pretty good to run, just validating that you're already good to go. No more ransom. It helps with the ransomware identification. You've been already hit, well, you can go to no more ransom, and if you can identify it or it's listed on there, there might be a chance there's a decryptor, and then you could download that. This is maintained by over 100 entities with the same goal of trying to protect one's system and stop the ransomware pandemic. We also have ID ransomware. So if you don't know what the ransomware is, but you know you've been hit with it, you could then go to ID ransom and they can assist you with the identification. They have something to the sum of 800 ransomware variants. And if one is identified there, you then could transition back to the site I previously talked about, and maybe you'll be lucky enough to get a decryptor. We have vaccine. And from here, this actually prevents ransomware from abusing the VSS admin, right? So volume shadow copies. This is fairly new. It's really good. So there's a debugger that's hooked up to when VSS admin is called. And if we start to see that it's trying to delete them, well, then this would intercept it and terminate those processes that are trying to do it. This is good because we recognize that ransomware seeks to get rid of backups. So this is an ability to kind of help you identify and really alert on those actions being done. So looking at it from this perspective, right, pyramid of pain, we understand if we're blocking hashes and IPs, those are kind of easier. We want to get to the TTP of how ransomware authors work. So doing that, we need to understand how most ransomware works and what do they seem to do as far as their chain, right? So we understand they need to have some form of initial access. They're probably going to do some credential theft, definitely going to move laterally, have some persistence, and then they're going to drop and execute that payload. So the more we can understand what that chain looks like, the better we can be positioned when we come to the TTP aspect to really stop this. If we're continuously chasing domains and IPs, well, we're not really going to get ahead. Those things are easy to just change and continue going with. All right, so you may be thinking, well, I'm just going to pay. And here's some reasons why you should pay if you're infected. Well, FBI previously stated that is the easiest path, right? Is just to pay. You could get your files back, maybe. And we say maybe because we talked about the decryptor may not working, and really you could pay and they still don't even give you a decryptor. And it might be cheaper in the long run. Hence Atlanta and some of the other cities that were hit with ransomware that we talked about. Now, conversely, here's some reasons why you should not pay. The CERT and FBI clearly say don't pay. Right? Contradicting there. But it may seem like it's cheaper, but it's really not. When you talk about disclosure, that isn't cheap, right? Doing your due diligence and regulatory stuff that you have to do. There's a target on your back. So the next time somebody's going to come back to you, there's a high chance you're going to pay. Why? Because you previously paid. So now you become that cash cow, if you will, when it comes to ransomware. There's no guarantee you're going to get your files back. And at the end of the day, the criminals win. Right? So as we kind of wrap things up here, we're going to say, all right, well, what do I do if I've been hit with ransomware? Contact the cybersecurity specialist, research the variant on your own, right? You may be able to find information based upon those sites that we listed earlier. We want to take those machines offline. We want to change all passwords, and we want to wait. We want to wait as long as we can, right? So we can make a well-informed decision and not some reactionary decision based upon the actions that were laid upon us. All right, so with that, that brings me to the end of my presentation. If you want to get this presentation, you can find it on my website listed there. I'm also a coder. I do a number of open source projects. If you're interested in any code that I've developed, you can find it on my GitHub. If you're interested in just trying to keep in touch or have conversations, you can find me on Twitter there. I'm always looking to have conversations with like-minded people of sorts. And with that, I appreciate you all's time. AvengerCon staff, I appreciate everything that you all do. Been helping, lucky enough to present the last couple of years, and this is a great cause. Thank you for everything that you do, and really everybody out there, thank you for what you do as well. All right, I look forward to interacting with you all in face-to-face one day or meeting you face-to-face. With that, thanks for your time.